Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings Benny's Bat section for Wednesday, June 22nd. There's an 8-game late slate that we're going to be talking about here today, so not a ton of games. I think there are 12 games total on the day. There's 4 or 5 of them starting in the afternoon, but we're going to be concentrating on the 8 games starting at 7 o'clock tonight. Pitching last night was pretty good. There was a whole bunch of different ways to go. A lot of the top guys, the top owned guys did pretty well. I don't think we're going to have the same situation today. Pitching is definitely not as robust. There aren't as many of those guys at the high end that are, automatic starts like the Cuetos and the Fernandezes and the guys that we had yesterday. And there aren't even as many of the guys that seem like mispriced in the lower range. Guys like a Chris Sale yesterday or Sonny Gray who put up some pretty good numbers for their prices as well. Today, we just really don't have that kind of pitching. So let's take a look at the 8 games that we have. What we like to do here is we look at each pitcher that's on the mound, figure out what their weaknesses are, and then try to figure out which bat's profile to do the best against them. So we're going to start right at the top with that San Diego at Baltimore game. You got 2 gas cans on the mound here. Mike Wright pitching for Baltimore. Left-handed bats hit 346 against them in 2016. They hit 322 against them in 2015. Now, right-handed bats are only hitting about 250 against them. And the reason why we talk about the right-handed bats, even though he's better against them, is because most of San Diego's team is right-handed. The only guy that I'm really looking at here is Will Myers. 345 WOBA for him, 222 ISO score. He's been hitting the ball really well lately. He's, somebody that's been hitting up towards the top of the order. He's been getting a lot of hits, knocking in some runs, has a couple home runs recently as well. So Will Myers is pretty much the, the best bat that I see here. I also think we can look at guys like, Matt Kemp and Yangervis Solarte. I think those 2 guys also have, a little bit of appeal here as well. Like I said, Wright is not a very good pitcher, so I don't mind taking some guys against them. On the other side of this game, we got Eric Johnson pitching for San Diego, the right-hander. Left-handed bats have been better against him. He does have a high fly ball rate to both left and right-handed bats, so the switch from San Diego to Baltimore is definitely going to be a big negative for him. Chris Davis, probably my favorite play to look at here. Left-handed bat, kills right-handed pitching. 396 WOBA for him, 321 ISO score, so he's definitely in a good spot here. I also think you can look at guys like, Hung Seo Kim up at the top of the order. Maybe a guy like Jonathan Scope, who's been hitting in the 5-hole lately. 363 WOBA for him, 240 ISO score against right-handed pitching. If you want to go with guys like Mark Trumbo, Adam Jones, I think all these guys are in play. I think this Baltimore team's going to put up some runs against Johnson today, especially at home. Camden Yards, good hitters ballpark. Definitely see some runs on both sides of this game, so I wouldn't mind having exposure to any of the bats here. Next game we can talk about, we got San Francisco at Pittsburgh. Jeff Samardzija on the mound for San Francisco, and he's got pretty good numbers. Doesn't strike out a ton of guys. His K numbers are a little bit low. When he does have his good games or when he does get a lot of the strikeouts, I don't know if this Pittsburgh team is one where there's a lot of strikeouts in here, but I guess it's kind of a decent spot for him. Right-handed bats are only hitting 231 against them this year with low home run numbers. The guys that you're looking at on Pittsburgh that do well against right-handed pitching are all the right-handed bats, actually. Guys like Jung Ho Kang, guys like Sterling Marte, guys like Andrew McCutcheon. All of these guys are like 360 WOBAs and 165, 180 ISO scores. So those would be the guys that I would look at to go up against Samardzija, but I don't think it's the softest spot on the day. Remember, this was a 1-0 game yesterday. We haven't seen a lot of runs being scored between these 2 teams. 1-0 game 2 days ago, I should say. Yesterday, San Francisco put up about 7 runs or so. So that's the way I'm looking at it. On the other side of this game, we got Francisco Liriano. Now, right-handed bats have always been better against him, but this year they're absolutely killing him. They're hitting 275 with a home run about every 5 innings, which is much worse than his normal numbers against right-handed bats. Buster Posey really the only good right-handed bat on San Francisco to go and attack him with. 366 WOBA, 183 ISO. He did pull like a hamstring or something the other day. He said it wasn't all that big a deal, but if he plays and if he's in the lineup, Posey's probably my favorite bat in this game. Other than him, I'm really looking at like a couple of the left-handed bats. A guy like Brandon Belt, maybe a guy like Jared Parker. Both guys got a little bit of power there. Like I said, this San Francisco team, we talked about this the other day. They really don't hit left-handed pitching all that well. So even though Liriano's not having a great year here, I don't really see a lot of guys that profile to, do very well against them outside of maybe Posey. Next game we're going to talk about, we got Chicago White Sox going up against the Boston Red Sox. Jose Quintana on the mound for the White Sox, and right-handed bats have a higher average and more home runs against him. He's actually been pretty good this year, but this is a very good offense that he's going up against. Xander Bogaerts, probably my favorite bat in this game. 402 WOBA, 125 ISO score, 3 of 9 lifetime against Quintana. He hits left-handed pitching very well. You can look at a guy like Mookie Betts, whose numbers aren't all that great against lefties, but he's a guy that can get you some stolen bases. He has some home run pop. He can do a lot of things for you, put up a lot of fantasy points. So Mookie Betts is in play for me. I'm also trying to stay with the right-handed bats. Quintana's really tough on the lefties, so guys like Hanley Ramirez, maybe a guy like Dustin Pedroia if he's up and towards the top of the lineup again as well. These are all the guys that I'm looking at. So any of the right-handed bats on the Red Sox, I think, are going to be in play against Quintana today. On the other side of this game, we got Eduardo Rodriguez pitching for the Red Sox. He has not been good so far in 2016. Right-handed bats have a much higher average against them. They're hitting more home runs. Really like a guy like Todd Frazier in this matchup. 366 WOBA, 340 ISO score against left-handed pitching. He's got a lot of power, hits left-handed pitching very well. So Frazier, definitely one of the bats that I'm looking at here. Tim Anderson, the young shortstop, leading off for them, had his first home run yesterday. Not really a guy I'm considering as a big power source, but he can get on base. He can steal some bases. He can score some runs, especially as a right-handed bat batting on top of that order. I like Anderson. Where you can still find him cheap, I definitely think you can use him. Even where he's reasonably priced, I think he's in a good spot today. And then the only other guy I think you can still look at is Jose Abreu, who's got some power and some upside as a right-handed bat going up against left-handed pitching. Those are the guys that I'd really look at. The right-handers towards the top of that Chicago White Sox lineup, probably the guys that are in play here today. Next game we can look at Seattle against Detroit. Michael Filmer on the mound for Detroit. And in his last 6 games, 4 of those games he hasn't given up a run. And in the other 2 games, he's only given up 1 run. So this guy's pitching about as good as you can possibly pitch right now. Right-handed bats have a little bit of a higher average against them. So a little bit of a reverse splits going on. He does have 6 home runs allowed this year in 34 innings pitched to right-handed bats. He has not given up a home run to a left-handed bat this year. So the righties are really the guys that I'd be looking for the power upside. That tells me guys like Dae-Ho Lee, 385 WOBA, 255 ISO in his first 100-something at-bats in the majors. Guy like Nelson Cruz, 367 WOBA, 224 ISO score. Those are the big power right-handed bats that they have on this team. I also think guys like Cano and Seager are in a pretty good spots, but I don't know if they're going to be in home run spots, but they are, 2 left-handed bats that hit right-handed pitching well. I think both guys could be pretty solid here today. On the other side of this game, we got Hisashi Iwakuma. Iwakuma does give up some home runs. Left-handed bats have a higher average against him, but he is tough on right-handed bats. A guy like V-Mart is definitely in a great spot here today. 6 for 12 lifetime with 2 home runs against Iwakuma, one of the few left-handed bats that they do have on this Detroit team. So he's definitely somebody I'd look at. Also like Miguel Cabrera here. Righty on righty matchup, 417 WOBA, 222 ISO. 3 of 9 lifetime with a home run for Cabrera against Iwakuma. So those are the 2 bats on Detroit that really stand out to me, the 2 guys right there in the middle of the order. Next game we can talk about, Tampa Bay going up against Cleveland. Chris Archer on the mound for Tampa Bay, and he's been a little bit of an enigma for me this year. Right-handed bats have a higher average, more home runs against them the last couple years. He's a guy that has thrown some really, really dominant starts, and then other times he's gone out there and just looked absolutely horrible, walking guys, giving up home runs. Like I said, it's very tough to figure out which Archer you're going to get here. He is much better at home, so having him on the road right now is something that gives me a little bit of pause. There's a couple bats on that Cleveland team that I wouldn't mind using against them too from the left side. You look at guys like Tyler McQuinn. This guy is a top prospect. He was like the top 15 pick in the draft overall. 389 WOBA, 220 ISO score for him in his first 100 bats in the major league. So, he's a left-handed bat that does hit righties very well. Could give Archer a little bit of trouble. I also like Jason Kipnis. Anytime you talk about, left-handed bats going up against the righty, 375 WOBA for him, 172 ISO score. So Kipnis and McQuinn, 2 guys that I really like. Maybe you can look at a guy like Lindor, maybe a guy like Santana as well. But again, Archer is one of the better pitchers on the mound when he's on. So I don't know if I'm really taking too many of these Indian bats against them. The other side of this game, Trevor Bauer's in a pretty good spot here. He is expensive. He doesn't normally have humongous K upside, but he can get some strikeouts. but right-handed bats on this Tampa Bay team strike out a lot against right-handed pitching. Bauer is a little bit of a reverse splits guy. Right-handed bats do have a higher average against them, but there's really nobody that stands out to me on Tampa Bay against right-handed pitching. And like I said, they are a team that strikes out a lot against right-handed pitching. Kluber threw a gem against them the other day. Right-handed pitchers have been doing well against them all season. So I think I like Bauer more than I like any of the bats on Tampa Bay here. Next game we can talk about, we got Cincinnati at Texas. Cole Hamels is on the mound. Cole Hamels is pretty much lights out to left-handed bats. So you really want to look at the right-handed bats here. They hit much better against them, but it's not like they're killing them. I mean, right-handed bats are only hitting 232 against them with 12 home runs in 72 innings. Zach Cozart, somebody who stands out to me. 394 WOBA, 284 ISO against left-handed pitching. 6 of 15 against Hamels from his days back in Philadelphia. So, a couple of these guys do have some pretty good BVP history against him from when he was on Philly and they played against Cincinnati Reds. Like I said, Zach Cozart, probably my favorite bat on the Cincinnati team today. You can also look at guys like Eugenio Suarez, right-handed bat, and Brandon Phillips, right-handed bat, Adam Duvall, right-handed bat with some power. Like I said, if I'm going up against Hamels, I'm looking for the right-handed bats to go up against them. So those are the guys I'd be looking at. Guys like Bruce and Votto are kind of off my radar today, and I don't think I'd have either one of them in any of my lineups. On the other side of this game, we got Dan Straley pitching for Cincinnati, and he's actually been really good, although he did get lit up in his last start by an Atlanta offense that's not all that great. Right-handed bats in the reverse splits kind of have a higher average against them, and everybody has a high fly ball percentage against them. He's one of those guys that, sabermetric guys that look at the numbers will tell you he's been kind of lucky. His BABIP is a little bit low, meaning his batting average on balls in play, which means that, eventually that's going to correct. He also hasn't given up a ton of home runs for the amount of fly balls he gives up, which is something else that a lot of the, guys that look deep into the numbers will tell you is something that should eventually correct. So while he has been really good early on in the season, he is a guy that's a huge candidate for some regression going forward, and maybe that regression starts here today. Like I said, with the right-handed bats doing better against them, I think guys like Jurickson Profar and Adrian Beltre, those are two guys that are in play. Profar's been on fire since being called up when, Odor was suspended for throwing a punch at Jose Bautista. Beltre still hitting cleanup in the middle of that order, so still a guy that can get you some hits and knock in some runs for you as well. And then even some of the left-handed bats, I really like Sin-Soo Choo. I also really like Nomar Mazara. Their price has come up. They're no longer like 3,100 and 3,300 like they've been most of this week when guys have been throwing them in their cash games as salary savers. I think they're like 3,500 and 3,700 now, but I still think both of them are, a little bit cheaper than where I would have expected them to be. Both are solid left-handed bats. Choo's been leading off. Mazara's been hitting third. So if you get those guys up towards the top of the order, I definitely think they're in play. Also, Ian Desmond, who's hitting in the 2-hole, is somebody that's just been, absolutely having a great bounce back year this year. So Desmond's another guy that I think might be in play today. Next game we can talk about, Philly at Minnesota. Now, we got two gas cans pitching here, but not really great offenses, although they did put up, what was the final score last night? Like 14-10 or something like that. So they did put up 24 runs yesterday. But these are two offenses that I don't normally expect to see that kind of scoring out of. Gibson is a guy with an ERA of 6, a whip of 1.60. Righties and lefties hit him well. He does have a low fly ball rate, though, so he doesn't give up a ton of home runs. He doesn't, not a lot of guys put the ball in the air and hit it out of the park against them. So I look for the guys that are going to get on base and do some damage. A guy like Odubel Herrera could rack up a couple hits from on top of that order. Does have some stolen base upside, can score a run for you as well. So really like Odubel Herrera. He's probably my favorite bat. Honestly, the rest of this offense is pretty much trash right now. Maikel Franco is a bat that people talk about, but he's been ice cold. Tommy Joseph came up and started getting a couple hits, but, pitchers are starting to figure him out. He's kind of pulled off. Ryan Howard, no longer a guy that's in play. I mean, whoever they have up towards the top of the order, whether it's like Cesar Hernandez or Freddie Galvis or, Andres Blanco. I mean, maybe you can look at these guys, but, like I said, there's not a lot of upside with this offense. So other than Herrera, I don't think I'm using anybody. On the other side of this game, we got Adam Morgan pitching. Adam Morgan is a left-handed pitcher, and he pretty much stinks. Last 2 years, right-handed bats hitting about 300 against them. They got a home run about every 5 innings. All the right-handed bats on the Twins are guys that I think are in play. You got Eduardo Nunez, you got Brian Dozier, you got Robbie Grossman. Trevor Plouffe. All these guys are like 340 WOBA guys with, like 180, 190 ISOs against left-handed pitching. So none of them are really great, but Adam Morgan is that bad that I think all these guys are going to be in play here from Minnesota. Last game we can talk about, we got Washington against the LA Dodgers. Really good matchup of two really good young pitchers. Joe Ross pitching for Washington. Right-handed bats are just basically useless against him. Left-handed bats, though, do hit him pretty well. So a guy like Seager, I think, is in a great spot. 385 WOBA, 227 ISO. He's been tearing the cover off the ball the last couple games. So, Corey Seager, definitely somebody in play. I guess you can look at the other left-handers as well. A guy like, Adrian Gonzalez, maybe a guy like Jock Peterson. All these guys have a little bit of power. They hit well from the left side. They hit well against right-handed pitching. That would be the way that I try to attack Ross. Completely stay away from the righties. I know Justin Turner is good in righty-on-righty matchups, and he's been hot lately. But Ross is that tough on right-handed bats that I'm not even really looking at Justin Turner today. On the other side of the game, we got Julio Urias, the rookie, 19-year-old left-handed pitcher. Here's the thing with him. He's still on a pitch count. He's only throwing about 85 pitches a game, and it's a pretty hard cap. I think one game they let him throw 86 to finish a batter, but as soon as he gets to that mark, they basically pull him. So you're not going to get more than maybe 5 innings out of him at most. Now, he is a great prospect. He does have high strikeout stuff. I don't even think he pitched into the 5th inning in at least one of his last 3 games. The other ones, he might have just made it to the 5th. And this Washington team does have some guys that hit left-handed pitching really well. Jason Worth is a 386 WOBA, 283 ISO. Zimmerman's a 381 WOBA, 313 ISO. And then even a guy like Bryce Harper in lefty-on-lefty matchups is 397 WOBA, 231 ISO. So it's not an easy matchup for the rookie, although I got to be honest, I watched this kid pitch. He's very good. I mean, he's got a couple strikeout pitches. His fastball, he can blow by you. He's got a big hook, throws a slider as well. I mean, he's the real deal. He's going to be legit here. Again, I don't know if I'd use him because, you're not going to get more than 5 innings out of him overall. They're keeping him on like a strict 85 pitch limit. But the kid can definitely play. So, it's a tough matchup. He's not very expensive. Washington does hit left-handed pitching well. So there's definitely some upsides and downsides that you're going to have to weigh over here. I think there are definitely softer spots if you're looking for bats, but I do think if you want to take some of these Washington bats, the kid does tend to be highly owned every time he goes out on the mound. So, for a tournament, you're probably getting some of those Washington bats pretty cheap. And that's the 8 games that we have on the slate today. So that pretty much sums it up, everything that we have here. Thank you for joining us at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.